Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are here. We are still talking about George Orwell's 1984, and today's topic is a big one, and I'm going to try to keep it as sort of simple and condensed as I can, because it's a topic that, honestly, we could write a thesis about. I know I've said that already. I'm definitely saying that today. And that is, I want to talk about the political underpinnings, the political setting that Orwell created for this book. So we're looking at the state of Oceania, and we're looking at the party. Now, it's a very big topic, honestly. There's a lot going on, and the book contradicts itself repeatedly in terms of what the party is, what the party wants, how it came to be, and all of that. So keep that in mind, that a lot of what we're talking about is deliberately hard to pin down. And I think Orwell definitely wanted it to be very hard to pin down when he wrote this. So let's start with sort of what we know from the book, especially what is kind of the common knowledge in the world of Oceania, 1984. So according to the party, and according to what Winston would have grown up knowing or come to know, Oceania is one of three superstates that were created after World War II, after a limited nuclear exchange. This one encompasses the British Isles, the Americas, Australia, some of South Africa, and I think some islands of Antarctica as well. The other two states are East Asia and Eurasia. Oceania is governed by the party, of which there is an outer party and an inner party, and of course the main governing body or main governing person is Big Brother, whose face is everywhere on posters all over the place, often with the phrase, Big Brother is watching you, right? Again, that need for surveillance is really, really important, like we talked about last time. The party officially is known as English Socialism, which gets shrunk down to Ingsoc, because that's how Newspeak works. And the stated goal, or the goal as we understand it, is to pursue the eternal supremacy of Ingsoc. That whatever that they are doing is for the good of the party is for the good of the people and the country, and of course, everything is for the good of Big Brother. And all of the things that they do, right? And we see the party do some terrible things. We know the party could do terrible things. Starting with, on the low level, watching everybody all the time, all the way up to the tortures of the Ministry of Love. All of that is, in theory, for the good of the people, right? As most governments will say, whatever we are doing, it is for your good. It is for the good of you, for the good of the people. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be working. When we look at Winston at the very, very beginning of the book, he is a party member, and he lives in a rundown, shambolic estate called Victory Mansions. Then Victory gets applied to a whole bunch of really, really awful stuff, right? Some bad apartment buildings, awful gin, and cigarettes that just fall apart when you try to smoke them. So everything's a Victory something. But nevertheless, Winston is a party member, and he lives in just this awful building where the elevator doesn't work. It smells like cabbages. And even when we meet an inner party member, we see O'Brien, he gets a few more privileges, right? He can turn off his telescreen. He can drink wine and stuff like that. But nevertheless, we don't get the feeling that anybody lives in really good conditions, that the party hasn't really made anyone's lives better, right? That is kind of an underpinning. There's this constant contradiction between what the party says it's doing and how it actually is. And that's the heart of the book, right? Is what do we believe? Do we believe the evidence of our eyes, or do we believe what the party tells us? And of course, the guideline of the party is that you are supposed to believe them, right? Whatever the party says is true, must be true. And we'll get to that in a minute. So that is sort of the fundamentals of the party and Oceania. Now, in the middle of this book, we are introduced to Goldstein's book. Now, Goldstein is our sort of hidden antagonist of the book. Goldstein is modeled after Trotsky from the Russian Revolution. He's the guy who was standing side by side with Big Brother at the beginning of the revolution, but then turned against the revolution and has now become the figurehead of any kind of resistance or deviation from what the party wants. And there is, allegedly, a book written by Goldstein, which is supposed to be the truth about the party and about the revolution, about everything else. And at some point, Winston gets his hands on a copy and he starts reading it. And again, if you're a political person, like I majored in poli-sci, so and here I am doing a books podcast. Weird, not a podcast. I keep forgetting, not a podcast. the book is very interesting, and the book posits something very different, that the three superstates are actually not terribly different at all. All three of them are kind of built on the same model, which is a very strong central government, a form of thought control of some kind, of making sure that the thoughts and behaviors of the citizenry are very, very tightly controlled, and some form of big brother. Now, while they are allegedly at war with each other, and we see that throughout the book, the Goldstein text says that the war might not even be a war. He says that basically war is an acceptable way of creating scarcity. That if technology were allowed to develop unopposed, people's lives would get better. And if people's lives would get better, then what do they really need the party for? They start to get anxious. They start asking questions about why we do things and whatnot. But if people are kept in poverty and scarcity, they don't have enough time on their hands to worry about politics and laws and policy and things like that. They're worried about eating and not dying. So the war is a way of keeping everybody in the population at that just about poverty level. So they do not have the luxury of time or energy to worry about what the government's doing. All they can really do is accept what the party has done. And the book, Goldstein's book, says at one point, when talking about how, number one, the war allows them to produce and then destroy what is produced. So they can say that, oh yeah, we're producing so much stuff, but then all that stuff is destroyed. It never gets used by people. And even for party members, that they need the excuse of a war in order to keep party members kind of in on the plan. And Goldstein's book says, in other words, it is necessary that a party member should have the mentality appropriate to a state of war. It does not matter whether the war is actually happening, and, since no decisive victory is possible, it does not matter whether the war is going well or badly. And we see this reflected in other parts of the books as well, where even Winston realizes that the numbers and the facts that the party are putting out to people might be true, might not be true, doesn't matter if they're true because nobody knows and nobody checks. But it is a really, really interesting observation about war. It certainly emerges, I think, out of the rationing of World War II, which Orwell would have been intimately familiar with, and how during those wars, when the government said, hey, we got to cut down on these things, the citizens said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. You know, in order to win the war, in order to fight the Nazis, we will make sacrifices. How far could a government take this? How far could a government push its citizenry to make sacrifices and to give stuff up? For the party, it's push as far as you can. So the war that they're going through. That's one of the reasons why it's so easy to switch opponents. And several points during the book, they switch. They say, we were at war with Eurasia, we are friends with East Asia, and then they swap and they say, oh no, we are at war with East Asia, we're friends with Eurasia, and we always have been. Because that control of thought that we talked about when we talked about Newspeak, that tight control of thought is essential to controlling the people. And the people must think correctly. They must have orthodox thoughts. And so, like I said, once they realize that people are willing to make that switch and willing to make those sacrifices, anything is possible, because this is where we get to sort of the reality of what the party and Oceania are. The war doesn't matter. None of it matters. Nothing matters. In the last part of the book, when Winston has been caught and he is being tortured by O'Brien, O'Brien kind of tells him a lot about how the party works. And he says that basically reality doesn't matter. Right? What is reality? Reality is what we tell ourselves. Reality is what we choose to accept. And Winston counters. He's like, but what about evidence? And what about, documentation and fossils and stuff like that? And O'Brien says, show me. Do you have that documentation? Do you have that evidence? What if all of that evidence is destroyed? What if it's all gone? In fact, at one point during the book, Winston is given a fairly serious rectification task. And Winston creates Comrade Ogilvy, who is a brilliant hero of the war who died tragically young. And Winston crafts this whole biography for Comrade Ogilvy. And it's brilliant and it's perfect propaganda. And once he sends it off, Comrade Ogilvy is going to be put into all the papers and all the books, and it will exist, he says, just as authentically and upon the same evidence as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. And that is a great line, because how do we know Charlemagne existed? How do we know Julius Caesar existed? We know from documentation of the time. Well, what if you could go back and change that documentation? What if you could edit it? What if you had that level of reach and authority and power? The party does have that. So Winston kind of wants to know, what is all this for? What's the point? He says several times during the book, I understand how, I don't understand why. And O'Brien basically says that the goal of power is power. The ultimate reason to gain power is power. In fact, he says, power is not a means, it is an end. The object of power is power. And so when you look at it that way, everything that the party does is to gain and maintain power, not because they are evil, not because they want to create a puppet state of people, but just to have power. And that's it. And then the party becomes immortal, right? If the party has absolute control over reality and what reality is, the individuals within the party don't matter. O'Brien doesn't matter. Winston doesn't matter. Julia doesn't matter. The party persists, and the party persists forever. And as it continues to edit the past, the party will have always persisted forever. That is the objective of the party. That is what Oceania exists for. And that is rough. That is kind of terrifying. Now, caveat to all of this is that what Winston knows about Oceania and the party is what he's told by the party. What O'Brien tells us comes from, well, he's an inter-party member. We know that the party has no regards for any concept of objective reality. The party could not care less about objective reality. Reality is whatever the party wants reality to be at any given point. So it is possible that none of that is true. In fact, my favorite running theory is that there is no East Asia, there is no Eurasia, and Oceania is actually just Great Britain, kind of like a hermit state like North Korea, and it drops bombs on itself to keep the population in line. And the rest of the world is cruising along like it should be. It's making technological advancements and it's being perfectly happy. And they just have this one weird little island in the North Atlantic that they just can't do anything with, and so everybody pretty much ignores it as best they can. That's my favorite theory. I like that theory a lot. And there is no evidence in the book to contradict that theory, because, like I said, the party doesn't care about evidence. So, where does this all lead us? What's the point? Why did Orwell do this? Well, I think certainly Orwell is writing this book out of the emergence of various totalitarian regimes of the 30s and 40s. He has seen the Nazis fall. He's seen Mussolini's fascists fall. But of course, the Soviet Union, I think Franco's government are still going. And Orwell has seen what totalitarian ambitions can do, and that they are terrible. And what happens to people when the control over their lives is given over to a bunch of ideologues. It is bad. It is always bad. And it is often said that this book is, it doesn't predict the future. Like I said in the first video, when I was like 10 years old, I thought it predicted the end of the world. It doesn't predict the future, but it is a warning to us. It is a warning to us in the future of what could conceivably happen. Now, like I mentioned last time when we talked about language, I don't think that the super, one-party state of Oceania is necessarily going to happen. I don't think so. We can look at North Korea as maybe our closest example, because the government in North Korea does have rather a stranglehold on what it calls reality. I think maybe the Chinese government too. We could throw them in there to some degree. But I mean, every government really kind of does that. Every government tries to claim that it is the best government. Every government tries to claim that its country is the best country, far above all of the other ones that are out there. So to some degree, yeah, every country is kind of doing what the party does, but no country really has the reach that the party does in this book, because this book is fiction, because this book was crafted by Orwell to sort of hold if you will, a dark mirror up to what could be, to show us what is possible, even though it's highly unlikely. And so that a reader reading this book would hopefully come out of it by thinking about how much of their lives are being controlled by the people in power, how much of their thoughts are being controlled by the people in power, how much are the people in power trying to determine what reality is for us, and how much of that do we accept. And if we can keep that in check, if we can be mindful of that, if we can listen to our governments and kind of see when they are trying to tell us what reality is, or when they're trying to tell us that, you reject the evidence of our eyes and ears and accept only the word of the party, we should be very careful about that, and we should call them on it. And we should do whatever we can do, whatever levers of government or politics we have, to not allow them to do that. And in a country that is like a representative democracy, for example, it is easy to call them on their nonsense. We have freedom of speech in many countries. We have freedom of elections and voting in many countries. And we should exercise that. And I think that is maybe the point of this world building that Orwell has done. In the end, where does this bring us? What is the point? Like I said, we have a very scary government in a very scary place. And we have Winston, who is frankly trapped from the beginning of the book. He is stuck in this web of control and politics. Not even politics, really, but this web of control by the party that he cannot escape from. And I think we, as free citizens, need to be grateful that we are not trapped in the same way that Winston is trapped. And we have to then exert whatever influence we have, whether great or small, to make sure that this kind of trap is not set upon us. So, like I said, there's a lot more to be said about the party and about Oceania, but I'm trying to keep these videos to a reasonable length. So that's what I have right now. If you have thoughts on Oceania and the party and Big Brother and all that stuff, please let me know. I'd love to hear your ideas and what you think was interesting. Do you think my theory about the little hermit nation is right? Is it maybe just London? Who knows? But we shall see. In the meantime, thank you very much. I think we'll have one more of these where we can kind of wrap up the book a bit, and then we'll be on to a new book, whichever one that is. I haven't picked yet. So thanks for sticking around. I appreciate that, and I will see you next time.